The fire you once carried is gone. You sit in silence, not from peace, but from paralysis. You call it procrastination. You say, I have no motivation. But I tell you this, your soul is protecting itself from a return to lies. What you name as failure is often the self refusing to serve the false god of the persona. It is not that you are lazy, it is that you have glimpsed the eternal and now the trivial burns your hands. You do not lack purpose, you have outgrown imitation. If you feel empty after awakening, you are not broken, you are being reformed. The work you were meant to do can only begin when the will to please, to perform, to pursue the world's approval has died. So I ask you not to force action. I ask you to listen. For in your stillness a new rhythm waits, deeper than time, older than ambition. This is not your end, this is your descent, and descent is the beginning of transformation. A man climbs a mountain seeking light. For years he has heard the call, transcend, awaken, purify. He has given away possessions, renounced distractions, and turned inward. Now at the summit, he finds only silence. The stars do not speak. The wind carries no answers. And for the first time in his life, he does not know what to do next. He sits, not out of peace, but out of paralysis. And the stillness that once promised revelation now feels like a void. This man, though he does not know it, has stepped into a sacred threshold. It is the space between the death of the old self and the birth of the true one. A spiritual awakening has occurred, but it has not led to clarity. It has dismantled the scaffolding upon which his will once stood. You too may have experienced this, a moment, a vision, a rupture, where something greater than the ego moved through you. And in that moment you knew that what you called you was merely a mask. But now, days or months later, you find yourself unable to act. The fire is gone. The ambition has withered. The tasks that once felt urgent now seem absurd. You call it procrastination. You say, I lack motivation. You feel guilt. You try to push yourself back into movement, but your psyche resists. You wonder if you are broken, lazy, or weak. But I say to you, you are not failing, you are dissolving. After a true awakening, there is almost always this void. Why? Because the ego, which was once the center of your psychic system, has been dethroned, and the self, the greater totality, has not yet taken its place. This is not laziness. This is not indiscipline. It is the sacred inertia that precedes rebirth. The modern world does not understand this. It worships productivity and performance. It pathologizes stillness. But in the deeper reality of the soul, there are rhythms that do not obey the clock or the marketplace or the demands of identity. You thought awakening would make you shine. But first, it dissolves what you thought you were. Before light, there is blackness. Before integration, there is fracture. The soul does not ascend by addition, but by subtraction. The structures that once gave you purpose, ambition, duty, desire, must crumble. Not because they were evil, but because they were borrowed. They were inherited. They were insufficient. This collapse is not a detour. It is the path. You may have noticed something strange in this phase. The things you once did effortlessly, work, create, strive, now feel impossible. It is not that the body has grown weak. It is that the soul has withdrawn its consent. The energy that once animated you, what I call libido, psychic energy, has retreated inward. It no longer wishes to serve the persona, the image you built for the world. It now serves the self, the buried truth of who you are. But because you have not yet met that truth, you float in the in-between. You are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are. This is the desert. This is the dark night. This is the liminal passage between false will and authentic movement. The spiritual journey does not always begin with revelation. Sometimes it begins with collapse. And so, if you are in that space now, unmotivated, confused, withdrawn, I ask you to stop fighting it. I ask you to listen. For in this stillness, something ancient is moving. Not quickly, not loudly, but surely. The self is slow. It does not rush. It does not panic. It waits for you to stop pretending. It waits for you to die, not biologically, but psychically, to die to your roles, your masks, your compulsions. And when the death is complete, it begins to speak. I have seen this pattern in countless patients. The businessman who, after a mystical dream, can no longer enter his office. The mother who, after an encounter with the numinous, finds herself staring blankly at daily tasks. The artist who, after touching the infinite, feels no desire to create. They are not lost, they are being reoriented. But because our world does not honor inner transformation, they feel shame. They are told to push harder, to get back on track. And in doing so, they violate their own becoming. You must understand, there is a time for striving and a time for stillness, a time for ascent and a time for descent. What you call procrastination may in fact be initiation. What you call laziness may be the self removing the distractions that kept you from yourself. So I ask you to reverse your gaze. Instead of asking, why am I not motivated? Ask, what part of me no longer wishes to pretend? Instead of asking, how do I get moving again? Ask, what wants to emerge in this stillness? Do not rush to rebuild the old life. Let it rot. Let it fall apart. For the new movement that will come, the one aligned with the self, will not be frantic. It will be rooted. It will be whole. You are not here to perform. You are here to transform. This is the beginning of individuation, the true path, the only path. And like all beginnings, it does not begin with light. It begins with emptiness. There are few experiences more disorienting than the collapse of the will. One awakens and yet cannot act. One sees but does not move. This is not the idleness of sloth, nor the comfort of rest. It is a paralysis born from the dissolution of psychic direction. And this moment, so often mislabeled as procrastination or weakness, is in truth a sign that the ego has been dethroned. In the language of psychology, this is what I have called the abaissement du niveau mental, a lowering of the level of consciousness. It is a natural and necessary consequence of spiritual rupture. For when one glimpses a reality beyond the ego, the energy that once animated one's ambitions, goals, and self-concept begins to fade. The libido, the fundamental psychic energy that moves the soul toward objects, withdraws. What was once urgent becomes irrelevant. What was once desirable becomes weightless. To the modern mind, this feels like failure. One wakes and cannot work. One tries to write, to organize, to perform, and nothing moves. But I say to you, this is not failure. It is the soul refusing to return to slavery. Let us look at this through the lens of a case I once encountered. A man of immense worldly accomplishment who, after a spontaneous spiritual awakening, found himself incapable of performing the simplest tasks. He was no longer able to engage with the career that had once given him purpose. His days became long stretches of silence and guilt. He believed something had broken. But as we worked together, he began to see that it was not he who was broken, but the mask he had worn. The life he had built no longer reflected his truth. His psyche had withdrawn consent, and his will, formerly the servant of adaptation, could not now move in a direction that no longer aligned with his becoming. This moment is terrifying. The ego, having lost its scaffolding, panics. It demands action. It accuses itself. But none of this brings movement because the center of psychic gravity has shifted. The ego is no longer in charge. The self, the totality, the greater wholeness has begun to emerge. And in its emergence, it allows no compromise. We can understand this more deeply through mythology. Consider Narcissus not as the figure of vanity, as he is commonly misunderstood, but as the symbol of one who sees the self and cannot look away. His gaze into the pool is not infatuation with ego, but a confrontation with the image of psychic totality. He sees himself for the first time, and that vision arrests him. He cannot act. He cannot move. The will dissolves. This is not a story of arrogance. It is a story of psychic stasis, a moment when the ego is transfixed by the truth of its own illusion. In awakening, something similar occurs. You glimpse the eternal. You touch the ineffable, but you have not yet integrated it. And so the will collapses, not from fatigue, but from reorientation. You are no longer living from the same center. The modern world, in its addiction to function and productivity, has no category for this. It pathologizes anything that does not produce. And so the awakened individual, now in a phase of sacred stillness, is called lazy, unmotivated, or depressed. But what is actually happening is that the old ego has been stripped of its illusion of sovereignty, and the new center, the self, has not yet emerged in conscious form. This phase is marked by fog. You cannot think clearly. Tasks feel meaningless. Desires vanish. But beneath this apparent emptiness is a deep psychic process. The soul is redistributing its energy. It is choosing not to serve adaptation, but authenticity. What you once called yourself was largely composed of adaptation, personality traits chosen to survive, to be accepted, to be successful. But now, with the ego's collapse, the soul refuses to continue this charade. It is calling you inward, not to hide, but to be reborn. This is why, in alchemy, the first stage of transformation is always dissolution, solutio, the breaking apart of form. Before the gold is found, the lead must be melted. Before the self can take root, the ego must fall. And so you sit paralyzed. But this paralysis is not death. It is metamorphosis. The caterpillar appears dormant in its chrysalis, but within, every cell is reorganizing into the form of the butterfly. You are not failing to act. You are becoming something for which your old actions are no longer appropriate. This is why no amount of discipline or self-shaming will restore your old motivation. The soul has declared bankruptcy on that currency. It will not move for reward or fear. It will move only when the next task emerges from within, not from pressure, but from alignment. Your first duty now is not to act, but to listen. Listen to the fatigue. Listen to the silence. Listen to the ache that says, I can no longer pretend. For in that ache is the voice of the self, whispering, let what is false collapse. Do not be afraid of this fall. The ground you are landing on is your own truth. The notion that the will alone governs life is a delusion of modern man. The true ruler of the psyche is not will, but libido, psychic energy. And libido, though invisible, is more potent than thought, more determining than discipline, more revealing than behavior. After a spiritual awakening, it is not uncommon for this energy to vanish from outer pursuits. What once inspired now feels hollow. What once compelled now repels. This is not apathy. This is not weakness. It is the sacred recession of libido from outer objects that no longer carry psychic value. Libido, as I use the term, must not be confused with mere sexuality. That is but one of its many expressions. It is desire, attention, movement, instinct, hunger. It is the flame of inner life which animates all human striving, whether for love, for knowledge, for power, or for God. When this flame withdraws, the outer world becomes dim, the colors fade, action becomes effortful, and the individual is left in a kind of psychic winter, a stillness that is not death but waiting. This withdrawal is not arbitrary, it is purposeful. The psyche, in its wisdom, redirects energy not according to the will of the ego, but according to the movement of the self. And when outer identifications no longer serve the evolution of the soul, the libido begins its descent into the unconscious. What follows is not immediate rebirth, it is disorientation, loss of interest, and what is so often misnamed as procrastination. But this is not procrastination, it is incubation. Let me give you an image. A woman dreams that her house is slowly filling with water. She runs from room to room, trying to stop the flood with towels, with buckets, with frantic effort, but nothing works. The water continues to rise, and in the dream, at the moment of exhaustion, she lies down, she floats. The water carries her upward, not toward drowning, but toward a kind of surrender. She wakes weeping. In her waking life, this woman had recently experienced a profound inner awakening. She could no longer find meaning in her work, her relationships, or her habits. She told herself she was lazy, but in truth, her dream revealed what was occurring beneath consciousness. The rising waters of the unconscious were reclaiming her. Her inner architecture, her psychic house, was being dissolved, not to punish her, but to transform her. The flood was not a problem. It was a baptism. This is what happens after awakening. The psyche, having glimpsed a larger reality, no longer consents to live in the confines of former goals. The libido pulls away from all things that are no longer sacred. It ceases to animate the puppet show of ambition. It returns to its source, the deep, silent waters of the unconscious, where it begins to feed new images, new forms, new structures. But this process is invisible to the ego. And so the ego, feeling no drive, declares a crisis. But this crisis is a lie. There is no crisis, only redirection. When you no longer feel compelled to act, when you find yourself sitting for hours in stillness or fog, when the world outside feels distant and your former desires mute, you are not lost. You are in transition. You are in the sacred liminal space between old self and new being. The libido has withdrawn, not to abandon you, but to prepare you. What is being born cannot yet be named. And so the outer world must wait. I have said before, the psychic processes that formerly took place in the outside world now take place within. This is not metaphor, this is clinical truth. After awakening, the arena of transformation is no longer external, it is internal. And the tools of this inner transformation are not productivity, not affirmation, not effort. They are silence, image, symbol, and surrender. The modern man, enslaved to outer achievement, cannot endure this. He will seek stimulation, distraction, any return to the old tempo. He will doubt himself. He will shame himself. He will even call himself ill. But the soul does not speak the language of deadlines. It speaks in tides. And you, dear listener, are now in the ebb. The flow will return, but not on your schedule. Let me tell you something further. When libido recedes from the world, it does not vanish. It begins to concentrate. And this concentration produces heat, psychic fermentation. It is this inner pressure that begins to create dreams, symptoms, compulsions, even breakdowns. All of these are messages. The psyche is not silent, it is speaking in its own tongue. A young man once told me he felt numb, that nothing mattered, that he could not return to his work after a mystical experience in nature. He felt he had touched something eternal, but now could not bring himself to respond to emails, to go to meetings, to pursue his goals. He was terrified. He feared he had lost his fire. But when we explored his dreams, we found they were teeming with life, symbols of lions, mountains, children, floods. The libido had not died. It had turned inward. His fire had gone underground, where it was forging a new foundation. This period may last weeks or years. The psyche is not bound to clocks, it is bound to cycles. And those who trust these cycles, who surrender to the dormancy, who stop shaming themselves, emerge not just healed, but reborn. Do not call this procrastination. That is the language of the world. Call it what it is: sacred withdrawal, psyche in retreat, energy turning toward what has not yet appeared. And so I ask you now, can you bear this silence? Can you sit in this emptiness without needing to fill it? Can you trust that what appears as stagnation is in fact the deepest form of movement? If you can, then you are already awakening, not to the divine alone, but to the mystery of your own unfolding. There is a dangerous illusion that haunts the spiritually awakened. It is the belief that once light is seen, darkness is overcome. That once a glimpse of divinity has been attained, the human is transcended. This is not only naive, it is spiritually fatal. For the moment one believes they have passed beyond the shadow returns with a vengeance. I've said elsewhere, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. This is not poetic license, it is psychological law. The more one identifies with the spirit, the more power one unconsciously grants to the darkness below. And thus, after awakening, it is not uncommon for the individual to become haunted by strange lethargy, inexplicable resistance, surges of anger, and deep aversions to formerly desired activities. One begins to believe something has gone wrong, but nothing has gone wrong. What has returned is the shadow, this time not as vice, but as fatigue, not as sin, but as silence, not as rebellion, but as refusal. You must understand the spiritual self, the one who glimpses higher realities, who feels oneness, transcendence, and love, is not the whole of the psyche. It is a part. And when this part grows too fast, without the anchoring of the shadow, it becomes inflated, detached from matter, from instinct, from body, from soul. The shadow returns not to punish you, but to bring you down, back to earth, back to body, back to balance. This is why so many, after awakening, fall into what they call procrastination. But it is not procrastination, it is psychic rebellion. It is the shadow saying, I will not go with you unless I'm included. It is the part of you that carried your ambition, your drive, your sexuality, your aggression, now feeling rejected by your sudden ascent. And so it withholds its power. The libido, which you once used to move mountains, now lies dormant in the underworld, not dead, but waiting. Consider Faust, a man of learning, of striving, of knowledge. He makes a pact with Mephistopheles, not because he is evil, but because he is incomplete. He wants heaven, but cannot tolerate earth. He wants the heights, but has not faced his depths. And so Mephistopheles comes not as devil, but as shadow, a necessary counterpart to his striving spirit, a dark twin to his luminous ego. So too with you. If you have reached for the stars, you must now walk through the valley. The psyche demands wholeness, not perfection. And the parts of you that were repressed in your spiritual ascent now cry out, not to drag you down, but to make you whole. What then are the signs that your shadow is active. You feel tired for no reason. You feel unable to act though you know what to do. You feel resistant to the very practices that once inspired you. You feel anger at your own ideals and confusion about your path. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of unconscious contradiction. The soul refuses to go further without integration. I have seen this in many patients. A man who meditates for hours each day but cannot speak to his father. A woman who reads every sacred text but cannot say no to her partner. A teacher who gives spiritual sermons but feels dead inside when alone. These are not spiritual warriors. These are individuals split from their shadow. And so the soul shuts down. It refuses to play along. It withholds its fire. This shutdown is misnamed as procrastination, but in truth it is protection. The psyche protects itself from false action, from premature transcendence, from egoic inflation. It says, until you acknowledge all that you are, not just the light, I will not let you move forward. What is required now is not discipline, but descent. Go down into the murky regions of your own soul. Look at what you have rejected in the name of awakening. Your jealousy, your lust, your rage, your laziness, your need. These are not sins. These are exiles, and they are knocking. Invite them in, not to rule, but to be known. Dialogue with your resistance. Ask it, what are you protecting me from? Speak to your fatigue. Ask it, what would happen if I acted? Speak to your boredom. Ask it, what dream have I abandoned? You will find that each of these shadow figures carries a piece of your soul. And until you gather these pieces, your journey will not continue. Do not be ashamed of the shadow. It is not your enemy. It is your depth. And without it, your spirituality will become performance, your wisdom will become pretense, and your energy will remain locked away. Procrastination is not laziness. It is the psyche's cry for wholeness. And so I ask you now, can you stop striving long enough to listen? Can you let go of your image of progress long enough to feel what you have pushed away? Can you see that your resistance is not against work, but against falsity? This is your invitation, not to act, but to integrate, not to fix yourself, but to meet yourself. Your shadow does not want to destroy you, it wants to be seen. And when it is seen, truly seen, you will feel a shift, not a rush of motivation, but a quiet return of energy, a calm readiness, a grounded willingness. That is when action becomes real again, not from pressure, but from truth. The modern man is taught to push, to strive, to master his impulses by force of will. But this ethic, so deeply rooted in the ideals of discipline and moral superiority, often becomes his downfall after spiritual awakening. What once gave him direction now leaves him fractured. The whip of discipline no longer moves the horse because the horse is no longer listening. And deeper still, the rider no longer knows where he is going. This is not a failure of character. It is the symptom of a deeper psychic split. The ego, formerly in command, now stands bewildered. It continues to shout commands into an inner landscape that has gone silent. This silence is not apathy. It is a revolt of the unconscious, a withdrawal, a dissociation. Dissociation is not merely a clinical term. It is a reality of the soul. It occurs when the unity of the personality fractures. When the conscious mind becomes so foreign to the unconscious content that it can no longer cooperate with it. In this state, the individual feels alien to himself. He acts as if he knows what he should do, yet cannot summon the energy to do it. He devises plans, but they fall dead upon arrival. He makes promises to himself, but breaks them without malice, only numbness. I have seen this countless times. A woman who, after a powerful dream that opened her heart to mystery, can no longer bear the routine of her work. She believes she must discipline herself to return to the structure, but the more she pushes, the more her body rebels. Fatigue, distraction, even illness, not because she is weak, but because her soul is not in it. Her ego commands, but her self remains unmoved. The dissociation has a purpose. It is a psychic defense against the violence of a misaligned will. Imagine a man in a dream whipping a tired horse. The horse drags forward, eyes dull, muscles trembling. Eventually it collapses, and the man, horrified, realizes he is both the rider and the beast. The image is clear. He has been whipping his own soul to perform tasks that no longer belong to it. This is not about laziness. It is about misdirection. You cannot force yourself into paths that the soul has outgrown. This too is the meaning of Jonah. He fled his calling, not from cowardice, but from fear of the task that was truly his. And so he was swallowed by the whale, cast into darkness, not as punishment, but as preparation. He had to descend into the belly of the unconscious to be digested, reconfigured, and reborn. In our age, the voice of the unconscious is often ignored. We mistake its silence for depression. We mistake its refusal for weakness. And so we force and push and plan. We drink more coffee, we write more lists, we scream at ourselves in the mirror, but nothing moves, because the soul is not moved by violence. To integrate after awakening means to listen to the voice that has stopped speaking, to sit with the horse instead of whipping it, to admit, I do not know where I am going. And perhaps that is the beginning of wisdom. You must realize the structures that once gave you energy were egoic constructs. You found meaning in work, in discipline, in the validation of others. After awakening, these structures collapse. And unless the will is aligned with the self, it will become tyrannical. True power does not come from pressure, it comes from resonance. If the task before you does not resonate with your innermost being, it will not inspire energy. It may succeed externally, but it will deplete you internally. It will become a tomb. And so you must ask, not how can I motivate myself, but what is resisting within me? You must begin to treat your procrastination not as an enemy, but as a guide. It points not to laziness, but to misalignment. This is the moment where you stop asking, how do I force myself to keep going? And begin asking, what part of me have I abandoned in the name of progress? I will say this plainly. You can no longer return to the life that existed before your awakening. To do so is to whip the horse until it dies. To speak to the self in the language of ego is to receive no answer. What then is the way forward? First, you must surrender the fantasy that you can control this process. Individuation is not a project. It is a mystery. You cannot plan it. You can only participate in it. Second, you must begin to listen, not to your goals, but to your symptoms. The procrastination, the fatigue, the resistance, they are not dysfunctions. They are the soul's syntax. Learn to read them. Third, allow space. Do not fill the silence with noise. Do not fill the emptiness with distractions. Trust that what feels like death is often gestation. Eventually, energy will return, but it will not be the same energy you once knew. It will not come from fear or guilt or ambition. It will come from within, from the quiet certainty of alignment. In the meantime, you must let yourself rest in the in-between, between old identity and new birth, between the ego's commands and the self's whisper. You cannot push yourself anymore, not because you are broken, but because the whip no longer works on a soul that has tasted truth. The darkness into which you now descend is not the void of failure. It is the sacred obscurity of transformation. In the ancient art of alchemy, this stage was called the nigredo, the blackening. It marked the beginning of the great work, the slow, painful decomposition of the false, so that the real might take form. Modern man recoils from darkness. He seeks light, clarity, motivation, and upward movement. But the soul does not develop in linear ascent. It spirals, and the descent is as sacred as the rise. What you call procrastination is often the first stage of psychic alchemy. The ego, dethroned by awakening, no longer governs. The goals that once burned like torches now flicker and die. Action becomes confusion. Clarity vanishes, and all that remains is stillness. This stillness is not peace, it is rot. It is putrefaction. It is the symbolic death of the known self. In psychology and alchemy, I wrote that the nigredo is marked by melancholia, by a sense of being broken down, invaded by contradictory impulses. The conscious personality collapses into a state of despair or paralysis. This is not illness, it is initiation. You are not failing to act. You are being acted upon by forces that do not obey the laws of productivity or goal setting, but by archetypal necessity. The seed must rot before it can sprout. To the alchemists, this was symbolized by the black raven, by Saturn's devouring gaze, by the dissolution of the king in the bath of unconscious waters. In psychological terms, this is the confrontation with the unconscious, the loosening of old structures, the decay of the inflated ego. Let me be clear, you cannot bypass the nigredo. Many try. They cling to spiritual optimism, to positive thinking, to mantras and affirmations. But the soul is not fooled. When darkness is denied, it only deepens. You must suffer this stage. But suffering in this case is not passive. It is participation in your own breakdown. It is the willingness to witness the death of what no longer serves. It is the refusal to resurrect dead purposes. You may wake each morning with the question, why can't I move? But the better question is, what is dying in me that no longer wishes to live? A patient once came to me with great frustration. He had built a successful career, had awakened to the emptiness behind it, and now found himself utterly unmotivated. He berated himself daily, called himself lazy, unworthy, disloyal to his gifts. But in analysis, a dream emerged. He stood in a vast cathedral, empty and cold. The altar was gone. In its place, a single candle barely burned. And from the shadows, a voice whispered, "Let it go out. Only then will the new flame rise." This is the blackening, the removal of the altar, the deconstruction of what you once worshipped. Ambition, identity, image, even virtue. You must let the candle go out. The world will not understand this. It values the fire of doing, not the dark alchemy of undoing. It rewards speed, not stillness. But the self speaks from a deeper place. And quote me truly, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is your task. Your procrastination is not a flaw. It is the refusal of the soul to collaborate with a lie. It is the body's resistance to the mind's tyranny. It is the self protecting you from premature resurrection. You cannot rush the death of the old self, nor can you rush the birth of the new. In the ancient texts, the nigredo was followed not by light, but by more darkness. It lasted as long as it needed to, and only when the vessel had truly rotted, when the king had dissolved into formlessness, did the albedo appear, the whitening, the purification. But that comes later. For now, you must remain with what festers, not in despair, but in fidelity to the deeper work. Begin to honor this stage. Tend to the blackness, like a sacred fire that burns down the illusions. Journal not to fix yourself, but to observe what decays. Walk not to reach somewhere, but to stay with what arises. You are not broken. You are being prepared. The old structures of identity, drive, desire must die so that the gold may be extracted from the lead. This is alchemy. This is individuation. When the world says, you have lost your fire, you must answer, yes, and it is in that ash where my soul now speaks. After the blackening comes not the lightning bolt, but the silence, not revelation, but pause. This is the time in which the ego once dissolved waits, not with anxiety, but with openness. The soul has lost its appetite for timelines. The self has no schedule. The modern man asks, when will I be productive again? But the psyche does not serve clocks. It serves truth, and truth does not hurry. To live in the psyche's rhythm is to enter a different order of time altogether. Not the tick of the clock, not the calendar of society, but kairos, the mythic moment, the ripeness of being, the hour ordained by the inner cosmos. This is why, after spiritual awakening, so many find themselves unable to push any longer. Motivation dries up. Deadlines feel violent. Ambition sounds hollow. The fire is gone, but not extinguished. It has been taken by the self to be rekindled in another form. You begin to feel that you can no longer force yourself. You sit before your work and nothing moves, not because you have nothing to give, but because the one who gave before is no longer here. The part of you that performed, that hustled, that climbed is gone. And the one who remains is still learning how to speak. I once said, the self is not a goal to be reached, but a presence already within you. That presence cannot be ordered about. It cannot be commanded into labor. It waits like a stone in the riverbed, unmoved by the currents above. Let us consider a dream that came to a man in this stage. He found himself in a vast white room, empty except for a table. On the table, a clock with no hands. He felt terror. How will I know what to do? He cried. Then from the silence, a voice replied, you no longer measure time. You now embody it. This is the mystery of the soul's unfolding. When the ego is no longer at the helm, the psyche begins to move on its own terms. There is no urgency in this. There is only alignment. And what appears to the outer world as procrastination is often the refusal of the deeper self to collaborate with falsity. It is not a delay. It is a refusal to regress. Imagine a tree in winter. Does it apologize for its barrenness? Does it hasten spring with anxious leaves? No, it waits. Rooted in truth, aligned with nature, so too must the awakened soul learn to wait without panic. The self in its fullness cannot be rushed. When it is ready, it will move you, not with effort, but with inevitability. Let me be precise. There is a difference between apathy and sacred stillness. Apathy is the collapse of meaning. Sacred stillness is the incubation of meaning. A woman once came to me in despair. I have lost all will, she said. Nothing excites me anymore. We explored her dreams. In one, she stood before a door carved with stars. She feared to open it. Behind it, she said, was too much. That too much was her soul. She was not procrastinating. She was resisting re-entry into a life too small for her. Her will had not died. It was in hiding, waiting for a new direction worthy of it. This is what I call the withdrawal of libido, the psychic energy retracting from outworn objects and reorganizing around new, yet to be revealed centers. This withdrawal feels like paralysis, but it is in truth preparation. We live in a culture that rewards the appearance of movement, but real transformation often looks like stillness. The caterpillar, before it becomes the butterfly, must liquefy entirely. Within the chrysalis, there is no form, no certainty, only faith in the process. So too with the soul. The question is not, when will I be motivated again? But rather, what part of me is asking for motivation? And is that part still valid? The ego, in its panic, demands performance, but the self demands authenticity. And authenticity cannot be rushed. You may notice that old dreams no longer stir you. Old goals seem absurd. Old identities feel foreign. This is not a crisis of will. It is the birth of new values. And these values will not be chosen by you. They will emerge within you, slowly, silently, authentically. You are becoming a vessel, not an engine. There comes a moment, quiet as dewfall, when the one who vanished returns. But he does not return as the same man. He no longer burns with ambition. He no longer walks with haste. The one who now rises moves not by fear, but by fidelity to something deeper, older, eternal. Action, once driven by ego, now emerges from alignment. This is not motivation as the world knows it. It is not the forced march of willpower, nor the theater of discipline. It is the quiet inevitability of a river returning to its course. The soul has turned beneath the surface, and now movement resumes, but it is a new movement. This is what I mean by rebirth through alignment. Not the resurrection of the old self with new tricks, but the emergence of the true self, forged in darkness and silence, purified in the alchemical fire of loss, doubt, and disintegration. The soul does not command. It whispers, "Let me give you a dream." A man, long barren of purpose, dreams he stands before a dry field. For years he has tried to plant things there, but nothing grows. In the dream, he sits down on the earth and weeps. Then, without moving, he feels warmth in his hands. He looks down. The seeds are sprouting, not because of him, but around him. He does not act. He belongs. This is how the self brings forth action, not as conquest, but as expression. The soul begins to act, not because it is told to, but because it must. It overflows into movement. In my work, I saw again and again how individuals who endured the collapse of false drives eventually came into a new kind of vitality. They no longer chased success or meaning. They became expressions of meaning itself. Their work changed, their relationships changed, even their voice changed, calmer, truer, more rooted. Consider the myth of Christ's 40 days in the desert. He does not emerge from that trial preaching ambition. He emerges with presence. He speaks from the center. His actions are deliberate, symbolic, aligned. Or take the story of the Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree. He does not act to save the world. He becomes a still point through which the world is changed. This is the archetype of individuation, the integration of shadow, ego, anima or animus, and ultimately the self. In this wholeness, action is no longer reactive. It is no longer compensatory. It becomes revelatory. You act because it is time, not because you must, not because you fear failure, but because something within you has taken shape and it wishes to be made real. A woman once told me, "I no longer strive to write, but words now come when I am silent." She had stopped forcing herself, and in that emptiness, her soul began to speak. That is the way of the self. It cannot be seduced by reward or threatened by punishment. It is sovereign, and when it moves, you will know. You will not feel urgency. You will feel rightness. There is no formula for this. It is not a method, it is a becoming. And this is why so many people misinterpret their procrastination after awakening. They believe they have failed. They seek hacks and systems to get back on track. But the soul is not interested in returning to old tracks. It is carving a new one in the dark, through stone, silently. You must be patient with the self. It will not shout, it will not compete. It will wait until you are silent enough to hear its breath. And when you do, when you finally act again, it will not be the act of the ego. It will be the act of a whole being in service not to identity, but to meaning. Here is the final truth. You were never procrastinating. You were incubating. You were molting. You were becoming. And so we end where we began. A man climbs a mountain in search of light. He finds silence. And in that silence, he becomes the light he sought. Not all at once, not as thunder, but as a soft inner glow, steady, incorruptible, whole. This is the rebirth of authentic will. Not imposed, not borrowed, but born from the soul itself. The wheel turns again, but now it turns from within.